Hi, everybody. Welcome or welcome back to Yeah Right, Scarlet Quill Society. It's June, and we are talking with Victoria Barrett about, well, publishing. Our other scheduled panelist has an internet outage because, of course, today we have an internet outage. Welcome to Infrastructure in 2024. Um, Speaking of infrastructure in 2024, how about the most awkward segue ever into a land acknowledgement? Um, so I know we're doing this virtually. I know we're located all over the country. You might be watching this from all over the world, but Yeah Right's personal nexus of contact is in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, and specifically on the traditional and ongoing lands of the Multnomah, the Wasco, the Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, the bands of Chinook, the Tualatin, Kalapuya, and Molalla. Um, when settlers came to Oregon, there were more than 60 tribes. Today, I think we have 9 recognized tribes. As part of our land acknowledgement, because that is so important, and it's so important to us to acknowledge the nexus that we have with the land and the nexus that the people whose land this is have with it. Yeah, right. Donates to the Naya Family Center. And Naya provides culturally specific culture. I can talk. I am a professional talker. Culturally specific programs and services that guide people in the direction of personal success and balance through cultural empowerment. Um, and you know, I'm going to make an even more awkward segue back to our talk. I know. Victoria, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? Say hi.
Hi. Sure. So I have been a literary editor for a lot of years. I started my editing career in graduate school when I was the managing editor of Puerto del Sol, which was, gosh, I guess it's about almost a 65-year-old literary magazine now. It was among the very first ever publications for a lot of writers who, by the time I was in graduate school 20 years ago, were household names. David Foster Wallace among them. And of course, he was in
Yeah.
2002 when I was in grad school, everyone's hero. So we were all very proud of that. And I apprenticed with the very well-known editor, also wonderful writer, Kevin McElvoy. And in that capacity, sort of took on some of his philosophies, which if you've ever encountered any of the many editors who worked for Mac, um, we are all very much writer-centered editors. We are folks who want to say yes. And so that was an incredible apprenticeship. And when I finished school and finished my time there, the thing I missed most was editing. And so, relatively shortly after graduate school, my partner and I, who was by then my husband, started one of the early online lit mags for literary fiction, for like straightforward literary fiction, called Freight
Right.
Stories. And we set out to be among the first magazines to bring some folks online who had not published online.
Right.
So we launched with an almost fully solicited issue with folks who had a long history in literary books. And then from that on, we never solicited again. And so at that time, online publishing was super experimental, and that wasn't our wheelhouse for either of us as editors. And so that was pretty wonderful. And as that proceeded, I thought, like, I want to do books.
Right.
This
What
is cool.
if?
I want to do books. And so I spent about a year studying the business and started the boutique fiction press Engine Books. Um, Engine Books is presently on hiatus. The pandemic did a number on us, but
Yeah.
during the 13 years of fully active publishing, I personally published over 30 books, edited about 25 of them. Did have a couple other editors work on a few things, almost all fiction, almost all literary fiction. We set out to have gender parity. which turns out is really controversial, right? Um,
Right? Like
right?
shockingly,
What do you
shockingly
mean more than half women?
in a world that's about 51% assigned female at birth, how weird is it to be like, well, maybe we should be publishing around 51% of
Yeah,
women identified writers?
yeah. So those among those 30 books uh we had a finalist for the Barnes and one of our early books was a finalist for the Barnes and Noble Discover New Writers, which probably would have eliminated engine books because it's so expensive from the publisher's perspective. Like they were like, look, you have to know if we pick you for this, that the returns alone on this book might put you out of business. And I was like, but we're writer centered. We want it for the writer. And then happily that writer's next book was a Discover pick with from a big press. So we got kind of the
That worked
best.
out for everybody.
It worked out for everybody. So we've had Lambda Literary Award winners, we've had IPPY Award winners, we've had tons of regional awards, tons of finalists. Super, super lucky that wonderful writers brought me their books. And then also reviews in all the, the whatever books, right? Carcass reviews, etc.
Mhm.
All those, but also reviews in People, Oprah, Entertainment Weekly, like things
Yeah,
that you spend your whole life trying to get in front of those audiences. So we had a really, really excellent run of fiction that deserved to be there and was.
that's awesome.
So
Congratulations to
that's
each and every one of your writers.
yeah,
Um,
it's an incredible, incredible group. And I don't think it's bragging too much to say that after working with them, several of them became my literal best friends. So um
it's so fun to talk about this though from the publisher
good.
side because we talk about it like yeah, right, because we do a lot of focus on emerging writers, and a lot of focus on how you become the best writer that you can be. uh, we don't get a lot of chances to really look at the industry from the other side, and I know that like you and I both are on sort of both sides of the industry, right? And uh, and I think that it gives us kind of a unique perspective because, like, when I see a submission come in for an anthology that I'm editing for or for a competition that I'm reading for, um, I I think everybody on this side knows how hard it is to be that writer. And I don't know how many writers know how shitty it feels. Look, I made it past the demonetization period. But I don't know how many writers know how shitty it feels to be choosing between two really good stories or really good books.
I
Like,
tell
we're
you,
not,
I we did 4 books a year. And
yeah,
I mean, I had sometimes I would get 1,000 submissions, 1,000 queries a year.
yeah,
And pick 4 of those was often kind of a nightmare.
yeah, it's
But
excruciating.
yeah, absolutely.
And they're
Um,
good. You want
it,
them, you want the, I'm not going to say every story is good. I'm not
no,
going to say
of
every book
course,
is good. Some books are real bad.
it's true. It's true. We yeah,
They're they're bad.
we've seen a lot. Um, I mean, it's. I think that it has to speak to how subjective the process is.
Yeah,
Because whether I said yes to a book, yeah, sure, that was about whether it was a good book. But what I think is a good book is completely different than what an
right?
agent looking at a market and a sale thinks is a good book. Like that's a different animal. Um, what I think is a good book is a different animal than what my husband, who is also an editor, thinks is a good book. Because there are absolutely certain standards that everything has to meet, but you also just it's almost entirely about taste and about
Yeah,
connection. And I was very lucky to have had the opportunity to connect with these stories that were remarkable
yeah,
and to be
yeah,
trusted with those works.
right? So
Yeah.
we end up spending like a tremendous amount of time with these stories too. 4 books a year, that's an average of 3 months a book, and that's not really how books come out. There's a lot of overlap there, but like you're spending literal months of your life. And I know that writers will also spend like years of their life writing and refining, and that everything that we write, we bring however much craft we have at that point in our lives, which is everything we are, to that book. But it's also like, if you're picking 4 out of 1,000, you're
Mhm.
going to pick the ones that you connect with. You're going to pick the ones that you want to spend time with. But that doesn't mean that the other ones, just because they didn't connect with you personally, are bad, right? It just
Right, for
means that
sure.
you can do four.
One of the things I was always most proud of in the acquisition portion of editing is that I I never how polished a book was never a deciding factor. Um, the one of the stories that I sort of love, and this writer became one of my very best friends in the world, but so we did a contest early on,
Hmm.
um, to partly to generate
Yeah.
interest. And I think pretty much all of the income went to the winners. But so we did this contest and we had our 5 finalists and I had my judge and I knew which book he was gonna pick.
Hmm.
And, it's a great book and I'm happy to have published it, but it was not the one I wanted him to pick. And the one I wanted
It's
him to
so
pick, like,
hard.
needed editing. It needed and I knew perfectly well I knew he was gonna pick that one because it was the most polished.
Right.
And it was the most ready to be on a shelf, but it wasn't the one that had my heart, even though I do love it. And, there was, like, weird stuff that needed some heavy editing in the one I loved best. And, so he picked it, we announced, we did all the prep, all the stuff we needed to do, and a few months later, I just like, I was found myself dreaming about the characters in this other book.
Right. Yeah.
And, so I ended up calling her up and saying, "Hey, look, I can't stop thinking about your book. I don't have the contest prize for you, but
Right.
what do you think? Do you wanna do this anyway?" And she was like she had a new baby, and she was miserable, and she was feeling just, like, horrible about everything but motherhood at that moment, and she was
Hmm.
like, "God, yes." And that's such a great moment when you say when you say yes to someone and they're in, you know?
Yeah.
But it wasn't about the book being the most ready. It wasn't about the book being the most complete.
Yeah.
It's about the book that stayed with me. And that's one of my favorite acceptance stories.
Yeah. When you say still needed editing, though, I think that that's different. Like what you and I would say still needs editing is real different from like what maybe a writer might think is
Hmm.
still needed editing. Like it didn't have typos hanging out there. It didn't have like massive grammatical issues. It was still readable. It just could be better and accomplish what the writer was trying to do better.
Yeah, and I think all of us know as writers from our side, from that side of the divide, we know as writers that we get a book or a story or an essay as good as we can. But
Yeah,
we all know that we can't foresee how a reader is going.
right? Like the more eyes you can get on your work, the better.
Yeah, yeah, and then you get it to an editor and, like, we are the professional readers.
Yeah,
We are the readers of readers, and so you get into this space where someone is reading this to see specifically to see what do I think the writer wanted to do here?
right. How can
And
we accomplish
not
this?
did they achieve it or did they overachieve it, but if they didn't, do I know how to help them get there?
Yeah,
That's what makes an editor the right editor for your story, your book, or whatever, is, and for me, that communication happens when I write to a writer and I say, "Look, here's what I see that you were trying to do, and here's what I think makes sense for a next step." And their immediate response is, "Of course." And
right.
as a writer, what you want to hear there is not you do wanna hear, "This is the best thing I've ever read," right? We all
Yeah,
wanna
always. We always want to hear
hear
that. But,
But for practical purposes, what you wanna hear there is, um, you wanna be right, you want your story recognized. You
yeah,
want to know that editor sees what you meant to do clearly. And I've always told people, like, "Look, when I describe your book back to you, if you don't recognize that as your book, then I'm probably not your editor, and don't just say yes, think." think
Yeah.
about whether I'm really your editor or not,
Yeah.
because I might not be. I might not be the right person for your book.
Right. That's the fastest way to tell a mismatch is you feel like it's become the editor's book and not your book.
Yes, absolutely.
Um, so moving away from editing and into submissions, because like
Yeah.
now that we've got our book or our story as good as we can get it, and maybe we've had some great beta readers, maybe we've managed to, make friends with people who are professional editors, and we've gotten some extra eyes on it. Um, we're ready to, put it in the mail. We're gonna send that email, and the first thing that people always ask me is why so many rules? Like the first thing that I see when I see a submission, we have never, yeah, right, ran the super challenge for, we did 29 of them and we were doing about 4 a year. So we ran that for mm, more than 5 and less than 10 years. Um, there was never a group of writers, and we would block things. We were trying to be as fair as possible, so we would say each judge has to read an entire group of writers and score an entire group of writers because I think that part of why it started was I got super offended by that Craigslist ad for NYC Midnight Writers, where
Oh
they were
yeah.
like, "We'll pay you $3 a story," and they would
Yeah.
just send you some random stories. And like, what if somebody got like the high scoring or low scoring judge? So we were trying to avoid that.
Yeah.
Um, because I was horrified by that mathematically. But I don't think we ever had a group where someone didn't completely disregard your whole thing needs to be in Times New Roman,
Mhm.
12 points, or Arial, 12 points. The whole thing. And every single group would have somebody who's like trying to get fancy with a title page
Mhm.
and trying to like do a big font or do some underlines or do somebody put a border on it once, like they were still in print shop. Um, and it's just like, and I would be like, guys, rules have reasons, right?
Well, I mean, and I think that, I mean, I think it's a really hard place to be in as a writer because you're constantly told, find a way to make your work stand out,
Yeah,
right? But when people say that, they don't mean your typesetting. They don't mean
right.
pretty. And it's the exact opposite. I want everything except your prose to disappear. And when you're
Yes.
using some wacky font or weird spacing or you've centered things that shouldn't be centered, I'm seeing the print job.
I
Um,
read all day. Don't make me fight. Don't make me fight for it.
don't make me work. Don't make me do extra work. When I am reading 1,000 queries, probably not full manuscripts, but when I'm looking at 1,000 submitters a year to
Right.
find
Here's my
flaws,
first 15 pages.
I can't do extra work. Um, to find you. You have to make it easy for me. And I mean, I think this is an okay place to say most of us aren't paid.
Yeah.
Once you're getting to the levels of submitting to an agent, submitting to a big five editor through an agent, yes, those folks are getting paid. But most of us aren't getting paid. If we are getting paid, it's very little.
Right. If
Um,
you're doing a small press, if you're doing an anthology, if you're doing especially an online anthology, if you're doing even like the semi-prozines like Uncanny or Lightspeed,
mhm.
um, your first round of submissions editors are not paid. Make their
Right.
lives easy. Please make their lives easy.
Right. And I don't, there are certainly writers out there who think we're using these rules as a weed out. There are writers out there who think we're being mean, or that like you just want a way to reject me. Well, like if that's the attitude you're coming with to me with, you're right. I probably don't want to work with you.
You're right. Number one,
Um,
yeah, if you think I'm looking for a way to reject you, we're never going to work well together.
right, right. And that's incidentally one reason that I had a lot of agented submissions over the years at the press, and I actually do not prefer them because you can't get a feel for the writer from an agented
Right. Yeah, you
and
don't know
yeah,
what they're going to be like to work with at all.
but all we've got is you on the page. That's all we know of you. And so make yourself look like you're going to be a good partner. with your editor.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's the justification for the rules. That's where they come in there, is so that I can focus purely on your story and not on questioning whether you're going to be somebody who is going to well, are you gonna want to be difficult about things later? Are we
Right.
gonna,
There's a
you
place for
know,
your personality, though. There's like a cover letter, there's an email. You can
yeah,
get some personality in there.
for sure, for sure. And opportunities to do that within existing guidelines are there, for
Yeah.
sure. But yeah, making it easy on us so that we know you're somebody who is gonna be great to work with, um, for me is what the rules are for.
Yeah. Yeah. And that does that for you, because it does for me kind of include things like give me a content warning. Like if you're doing something with a miscarriage in it, with an abortion in it, with a gory sudden death in it that kind of comes out of nowhere in what has been a fluffy story, because like that's the thing that you want to do, the twist you want to do is this suddenly like I'm using a fairy tale voice, but I'm telling a very, very dark story. Like for me, I would like to have a content warning on this. Like I'm not your reader. I'm not going into this wanting to be told a story. I'm your editor, maybe your publisher, and I want to go into this with my best headspace.
You know what? I really wish I had ever been vigilant in that way and had ever asked for content warnings, because I never did. And then I thought, well, you didn't give me one because I didn't ask. And
Hmm.
and so I tried to sort of take my own responsibility for that failure over time. But yeah, I mean, but there's also sort of a more subtle version of that, which is when I am saying this is an explicitly feminist space and you are sending me work that almost aggressively centers men, cis white men, and their
Right.
needs and their drives, and in fact, like pushing that boundary even in your cover letter.
Yeah.
Well, I'm like unlikely to read very far in that case.
Right. And what's your goal here? Like, do you
But
just
yes,
want
what's
to
your goal here?
feel righteous about being rejected? Do you want to get
Yes,
published? Like, pick one.
right. I think that's right, and I think that because I would get like nasty emails too about
Oh
again
my God.
saying
Yeah.
I'm going to publish, 51% people who
Yeah.
are not cis men. Um,
Yeah.
and and yeah, I mean, I would get really shitty emails about it. I would get shitty social posts about it. Um, I had one woman write me a like extremely, extremely angry email on her husband's behalf about it. That was
Oh
one of my favorites.
no.
Like, "Ooh, I am really not going there now." Um, and
Right. That's
again,
this is
like,
the
what
thing,
is your
right?
goal in these communications? Because it's a professional space,
Yeah. If you
right?
if your goal is to never get published, please push back on your rejections.
Yeah.
We
Yep.
talk. Have
Me
you
too,
have
and
you
I
noticed? We're
very,
right here.
very
We're
rarely
talking
read the
now.
old ones, but I have a couple times.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
couple of
Every
ones
now and
that
then
were veiled threats and whatnot.
somebody will be like, "Oh, I just got a story from so and so or such and such," and I'm thinking about it. And if I know something about that person, I will tell them.
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
Um, and I've had submissions that were like transphobic poetry on a picture. I've had submissions that were just straight porn. I've had
Mm.
submissions that were, I think, I think the fastest way to get rejected by me, without being egregious about things, is write me a story and in 1,000 words, never use a woman's name, even though there are women in the story.
Yes. And it's basically an entire genre to write the story of the, yeah, like a manic pixie dream girl story is one channel of that, but it's an entire genre to write the
It's a
story
whole genre. Like I've
of
had stories where it's a
women
wife.
who exist because of their impact on men.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But yeah, I've had some of those too with the like everyone's named in the story but the woman.
yeah. And
Um,
it's just like, notice who you're naming, notice who gets to be a person in your story. Because if they're not all people, I'm not passing you on.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think there's some real I think there are, some really overlooked tendencies in this way where folks a lot of the time don't even sort of realize how dehumanizing their fiction can be.
Hmm.
Um,
Get a good beta reader, you guys. Get a good beta reader.
absolutely. Absolutely key. Someone not like you.
Yeah.
Someone who does not share all of
And
your
someone who doesn't
empathy
love you.
inputs. Oh yeah,
Get
sure.
someone who doesn't love you, because it's, I say I hate rejections. For me, the feedback that I hate the absolute most to hear is, I loved this.
I had that happen in grad school from a
Like,
very famous
feels good for a
visiting writer.
second.
Yeah, she was a very famous visiting writer, and her she was part of her contract for the visit was to give two students feedback or whatever. And we
Right.
rotated, we took turns, and she was like, I mean, this is really good. I don't know.
Right? I
Like,
hate
what
that.
the fuck am I supposed to do with that?
I just like, I know this is not perfect. Number
Hmm.
one, it's almost always a story that's been like rejected from two or three places before. So I know it's not perfect. I know that this is the other thing that I always want to be upfront with about rejections is, uh it might be perfect. It might just not be a perfect fit. Maybe we're doing an anthology and we've already got 8 robot stories. Maybe we are doing an anthology and uh, the first 5 stories we picked have this theme, and we're gonna roll with that theme because we think we have 5 really strong stories for it, and we know we've got 2,000 other submissions to get through. So we're just gonna stick with that, and then we're gonna have this, themed issue. Um,
Right, there's stuff going on behind the scenes that you, the writer, don't know
the
and
the one
can't.
that killed me, the rejection that killed me inside was I had submitted a poem to someplace, and I'm not going to say where. I may have said where else. When guys, go watch all the videos, like, subscribe while you're down there. Um, but I submitted a poem, and the reader sent back a personal rejection. Which, thank you to everyone who spends the time to send back a personal rejection. Like, I've done it. It takes a lot of time, you guys. It takes a lot more time than you think to send a personal rejection. It takes like an hour. Um, but they said, this poem isn't right for us, but if you ever write anything just like it, please send it.
Oh, geez.
What the fuck does
What
that mean?
what there's no route out of that that is satisfying.
Just like this,
None.
but not this, but just like it. Like,
But this
tell
also seems like
me
a
what
good
was
time
wrong.
to say this also seems like a good time to say if you are early in your submitting career, if they even sign something with a real name, you are
You're in.
in the top half
We're
minimum
we're
of
we're
the
already talking about you. We're
yes,
already saying,
in a good way.
I got this story and it wasn't right for us this time, but if you ever get anything by so and so, please take the time to read it.
Yeah, yes. And the goodwill that comes from that
Yeah,
spreads.
but you can also shoot yourself in the foot when you get one of those personalized rejections, and the first impulse you have is to write back.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people legitimately don't know if they should write back or not. I think that's a whole thing, where people are like, but they said something nice to me, I should respond. I think there's
You
both a
can
good
send a thank you
and a
note
negative.
if you feel like that. Don't write back and be like, well, if it's so good, why didn't you publish it? What's
Yep,
wrong with you? You don't know what you're reading.
yep, yep. There's two routes people take into that communication. I personally don't think you ever need to respond even in a positive way because that's just you're just asking more of that editor's time. I don't mind those. I don't get mad at
Right.
those.
Like, I love the
Um,
thank you note, but
yep.
also, like, I'm
It's
already talking about you. You're okay.
It's cool. It's cool.
You're
If I
okay. We're
bothered to
we're
tell
good.
you my first name, we are good. But yeah, if you're ever gonna argue in a response, um, save it in drafts and don't send it.
Yeah.
And Yeah, maybe that
Save it,
satisfies that
print
itch.
it,
Bitch to
burn
your
it in your soul
friends
safe.
about me endlessly.
Not online. Don't do it on
Not
social media. I
online.
see that. I
Yes,
see that.
yes. And yeah,
Yeah.
you're not as anonymous as you think you are when you do that.
No,
So
you're really not. No,
we know.
we know. We know who you are. Um,
Yep.
sorry, not sorry. So yeah, so all the rules have reasons. What happens when we fuck up?
Well,
Because like
yeah.
the number of times I have hit send and then been like, my attachment, or oh, my manuscript format, I didn't change it back into times. I didn't. For me personally, I'm okay with a, hey, I sent you an email by accident. I'm so sorry. This is the email you should have received. Um, please don't read that. And you can put it in the subject line.
Yes.
Put correction in the subject line, all caps.
Yeah, it depends on the submission platform and how
Yeah.
the guidelines and all that kind of stuff. Um, there are a lot of things I really hate about Submittable, both as an editor and as a submitter. But one of the ones I don't hate is that you can just click that withdraw button and it's like it
Yep.
never existed.
Yeah.
And start over. And like that's I don't know if that's intended to be a gift to writers, but it is.
I think
Um,
it is. I think they intended it as a gift because
yeah.
like I look at like Submittable or what's the other ones, Moksha or whatever else. And
I can't remember the other one a lot of journals use, but
they all
yeah.
kind of have a yoink button
Yeah.
and use the yoink, use it
Yeah.
fast.
And I don't I never went and looked at things that were withdrawn unless I was already reading it when it was withdrawn.
Yeah.
And even then, like you withdraw a query when I'm reading your pages because you got it picked up somewhere else, I almost always
Congratulations.
wrote back and congratulated you. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But yeah, I mean, if it's an email submission, I have never been mad at somebody saying, "Hey, I goofed. I'm so sorry if I wasted your time. Here's a replacement. Thank you." Like, no, I've never, that's never been a problem for me as an editor in any of my capacities.
Right? Like
Be human about it. Like, be
be human
sincere
about it. Yeah,
and be
be
human about it.
sincere,
Yep.
be humble, but show that you're like it does to me as an editor when I receive those, it shows that the person is making a good faith effort to fix their mistakes. And that's
Yes,
somebody that I want to work with.
absolutely. And somebody who especially if you're like, sorry if I wasted your time. Like I said, I would get lots of those. And, like, thank you for acknowledging that my time matters.
Yeah,
Like, I want to edit books
look
with
at
my
me. I'm a
hands. And
person.
yeah, yeah. So, so yeah, I've never, I can't imagine a circumstance when I would have a problem with somebody saying, whoops.
Right?
Right. So I don't think that but I do think probably a lot of people who are early in stages of figuring out their submission persona, and it is a persona, and I would encourage people to think about that. Um, I think a lot of
Yeah,
people
for
go,
real.
"Oh, I fucked that up. I'm doomed," and just like walk away, and
It's
you
not,
don't
you're
have
not in high school. It's not
no.
an assignment. This
It's not the
isn't one and
SAT.
done. This is an adult professional thing that you are doing. And part of doing adult professional things is acknowledging that we are all adults doing professional things together. It's a party. Um, and we all fuck up, and acknowledge that you fucked up and be open to the idea that we also fuck up. We're reading, 1,000 submissions for 4 books. Sometimes we get your email wrong. But this does bring us to the other big question, which is following up. Like,
Yeah.
how long do I wait? When do I follow up? What do I follow up with? Um, for me personally, if you've got a hilarious story about somebody who followed up and got mad that it took you 3 days to read their entire book, I've certainly gotten those.
You know, I have not had a ton of those. Part of that is because for the most of the time I was working on engine books, I used Submittable, and I think that Submittable throws up a barrier to sending stupid shit. I
Yes,
think it's
thank you,
a lot,
Submittable.
yes, I think it's a lot easier to dash off an inappropriate
Yeah,
email than it is to get in Submittable and click into the messages and da 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 da. Um, And I don't know that I have any good stories, unfortunately, about stuff like that. For the most part, my submission guidelines were extra clear, and people generally did wait things out. Um for the most part. But again, for me, it's a question of persona. Do I want to work with you? If you send
Right.
me a really shitty follow up when you're like, what's taking so long? I might not even answer you. I might just hit the decline right there.
Right. And on the other hand, there's a way to do it. There's an art to it where you can say, hey, so I notice your website says that you get back to most people within 2 months, and it's been two and a half. And I just wanted to make sure that you do, in fact, and this is another one where submittable is useful because you know if they have your story or not. But
Mhm.
I just want to make sure that you do still have my story or that you are still reading for this anthology or whatever, because I need to know if I can submit it someplace else if you guys are closed.
Yeah, I mean, and just acknowledging that you read the submission guidelines is a big one, actually, because I
We
think
don't
you're
hide them. We
cooperative.
don't hide them right there.
We
They're
don't hide
right
them. And
there.
if you're like, hey, that says 3 months, I'm like, it's like when your teacher says you read the syllabus.
Right?
Right? And
I'm
so
excited.
I know. So I'm like, oh, this is a serious person. I can take this person seriously because they are paying attention. Am I
Yeah,
breaking?
a little bit.
Okay, I'm not sure what is up there, but um, because I didn't move. Anyway, so I'm excited at that point that you've acknowledged I have submission guidelines and that
Right?
you've read them.
I'm now
And
excited to get to your story. And
quite quite eager to apologize if I have blown past them, which certainly happens to everybody because again, we're not getting paid. Um, things got really dicey when I had children
yeah.
because I thought like people had always told me like, "Oh, they nap and you can get everything done." And I was like, "Ah, yours do." Um, and things got really, really slow then, and I was tired, and so but again, if you remember that we're like living creatures with lives, and the other thing is we're most for the most part we're doing this in our homes.
Yeah.
Um, I was absolutely editing with my kids in my lap and um
Right, y'all,
editing with my
this is
kid
my
in a
office.
pack. Right.
I do all of the work right here. This is the day bed. It's often covered in cats. There's a dog right down there. And sometimes I'm reading your work and the dog needs to go for a walk. And that's just going to be what it is.
And it's part of our home lives. It's part of our felt experienced world
Yeah.
to work. So anything that sort of that speaks to an acknowledgement of that humanity also speaks to the idea that we're going to do okay working together.
Yeah. And I know that there's stories about like, oh, so and so is such a big arrogant author, or they get to be that arrogant because they're a money maker, or you can sure as hell tell in the Harry Potter books when Joe Rowling stopped taking edits.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
you can you can read, y'all, if you still somehow have the books in your house, read through. You won't have to get through too many books before you see the point where the edits stop.
And
Um,
sometimes that happens because the editors realize they have such a cash cow on their hands that they're not doing the work. But sometimes it happens because the author is like, yeah, you want the money or not?
yeah,
Because I'm
yeah,
not doing it.
yeah,
And because you know if you've published as a writer that doing edits is I mean, I don't send my own work out very much. I have a whole complex. But I published the first story I've published in a long time in February. And I
oh, congrats.
totally get it because every edit of every comma felt like a dart. I was like,
Yeah,
to stop and think like, do I need to accept this edit? Was my comma or lack of comma okay? Super voice the story. Every single edit matters. And we know that.
yeah,
And um, but it's good, I think, for writers to know that the time we've given to your work is a gift,
yeah,
whether
yeah,
that's in responding, whether that's in just the reading. um, even, you know, even a rejection can be a gift because if I have recognized that we are not going to work well together, you don't want me to say yes.
Right. Like, I want you to be with someone that you can work with, that you want to work with, that wants to work with you. But God, I had Christine and I should say, had a novella published a couple of years ago, I guess a few years ago now. So old. But it was, even coming to this both as editors, uh, we're going through these edits and I'm like, yeah, sure. That's not necessarily the way I would have done it, but it's not wrong. And then we found the word that we wanted to fight for. And I'm like, yeah, no, we're not writing that differently.
Mhm.
That's that word, changing that word. Um, and you want to be respectful about it coming at it as an editor and not be like, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, you
But
feel
it's,
that at first, right? Like your
yeah,
first
you
feeling is
do.
like, this idiot. And then you have
Well,
to back off of that.
and there was a cultural competency question about that word and that editor. And uh, we worked it out. We said, no, that's, culturally, this is the correct word. And then we went and did our research and backed it up because we felt very
Yes.
strongly about it.
Yes.
Um, but it was a moment. I had that moment that I think every writer has, which is like, how dare?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you know, another thing I was just thinking of while we were talking about this is that if you're submitting to journals at universities, journals at MFA programs, very frequently your editor is a student
Yeah.
and you are giving them the gift of experience with your work.
Hmm.
You're not always going to be right. And an editor like me who's been doing it for 30 years is not always going to be right.
Yeah.
And we know that. I mean, maybe my coffee was weak this morning and I didn't quite
Right.
nail that sentence or whatever. Like we know
Push
that.
back, pick your battles. Don't push back on
Yes.
every edit.
Yes.
Pick your battles, but we're not here to turn your story into something else.
No, and I think there's a real perception of that among a lot of people where they're like, you know, then there probably are editors. I've never encountered one in the wild, but I think there probably are editors who are really like, Gordon Lishing everybody. If you don't know, Gordon Lish was Raymond Carver's editor, and if you can get at the library books where they put side by side Carver's original work and Lish's edits, which made it into a completely different thing. And I think because that stuff is so famous and well known, there's another case study that's like the 37 drafts of the last page of A Farewell to Arms.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
that is actually Hemingway doing his own revision. But still, like there are these case studies you can find of editors that are just traipsing all over a writer's work. And I think that makes people afraid. But you have to let it be a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like as an editor, if I have to change your story into something that it's not to publish it, your story was never a good fit for the thing that I'm publishing.
And that was my mistake of saying yes if that happens.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's on me. That's
Yep.
on me. And I should at that point honestly pay you a kill fee and move on.
Yes. That would be the more responsible thing to do.
The most ethical. And not I know not everybody has the option. We're all underfunded. Um but yeah. So uh the other question that I ask a lot of submissions editors, editors who receive submissions, which is a different thing, agents, um, the thing that you are the most tired of seeing, like what would you be so thrilled to never like open an email and see again?
Sexual violence. Anything suggesting sexual violence, I'm out.
I'm so
And
exhausted by it. It's not like edgy, it's just boring.
it's yeah, well, and I mean, I want to backtrack actually and say like legitimately heartfelt, meaningful survivor stories, absolutely, I'm in.
Right. But
But
don't like spend 30 pages lovingly describing the act of sexual violence
no,
and then one page like, and then she killed everyone, the end.
Yeah, yeah, it's I had somebody send me, this was actually just a favor for a friend. Somebody sent me a story for feedback. They didn't normally write fiction, and I'm reading, and the voice is super compelling because they're a poet, and they're a good poet, and I'm reading, and it's just getting
Hmm.
darker and creepier and darker and creepier and darker and creepier. And then I realized what was being sprung on me. And yep,
Yeah.
I could never see it again and be happy.
Yeah.
And the other thing is just like there's a whole tenor of writers who sort of come into it with an attitude of like, I'm gonna show them.
Right.
And yeah, I could never see that again. That'd be cool.
And you're not showing anybody anything because we've seen it.
We've seen it
We've seen
all.
it. Whatever edgy, like, I'm not saying don't put violence in a story. I feel like everybody should know that, like, I read Stephen King. My hands down favorite movies of all time are the Resident Evil cycle with Mila Jovovich. Uh, I consume violent media almost nonstop. But the plot twist doesn't have to be the narrator was a murderer.
Yeah.
Like, you're so boring. If you're writing that story right now, I will say, I received a story where that was essentially the plot twist this year, and
Mm.
it surprised me. And I don't think I've been surprised by that story in 20 years.
I mean, one of the things you always hear in conversations among editors is like break every rule if you can.
Yeah,
Like there's always going to be some story that eventually surprises us, but it's
right.
rare.
But it's
And
probably not going to be you,
it's
honestly.
I mean, it's extraordinarily rare for
It's
sure.
it is rare. It's like, oh, I had Natalie Walshots, who wrote Hench,
Mhm.
on talking about like why people pick traditional publishing.
Mhm.
Uh y'all go back, watch it. It was great. Um, but we were talking about how everybody's story of publication, like, everybody wants to know, well, how do I get published? And every single person's story is different.
Yeah,
Whether it's the author that you called and said, no, I want your story, after all, I want that book. Whether it's, Claire Willett. Do you remember when Claire got published? We were all on social media together at the time, and it was her nano novel
I
that
think I do. It's
that
on.
she didn't write. She had the outline in like one chapter, and
Mm.
there was a press looking to expand, and somebody said, "Oh, I think my friend wrote a nano." Like, there's no surefire way to publication. There are some fairly surefire ways to get not published. Um, Ignoring the submissions guidelines, pretty surefire way to not get published. Uh, including sexual violence in your cover letter,
Yeah.
including gendered violence in your cover letter. Um, Sending us a I've been guilty of this. This is my personal issue, is a book that is just like way longer than the person says they want. Um,
Yeah, I mean that stuff matters
but it
because
happens. Like, Name of the Wind got published, but
yeah. Yeah, for sure. But you don't know what you don't know why that
yeah,
particular guideline exists. And the sort of the talk on the street is like, well, they just don't want to pay for the paper. But like, look, if you're
but maybe
looking
they don't. That's a valid
maybe they
reason.
don't. If you're looking at Random House, the paper costs like you can't stretch those decimals out that far, how little
Yeah,
that paper costs. If you're talking about Engine Books publishing 4 books a year, we are not getting printing that cheap.
yeah,
We spent, I mean, God, I spent $40,000 on 4 books one year out of my own pocket. Um, because it is not cheap. And that was the year I published longer books. So yeah, I mean, that is a
folks.
consideration.
This is why you might want to traditionally publish instead of self-publishing.
Yes. I
Turns
mean,
out,
I could have a whole conversation about that myself, but because I think
right?
there's a place for everything and very few people know how to find it.
Yeah, yeah. So, keep looking, keep trying, but like look for imprints that are publishing books like your book.
Absolutely.
Um,
That's your very best path.
if you're not reading in the genre you're writing, you don't know where to look. Start reading in it. Why are you writing in a genre you don't like to read? Sit down and ask yourself that. Um, um, let's see, what else? What else do people ask me? I've been trying to go through this list of questions that folks have asked.
One of
Um,
the things that I thought was interesting in here that we haven't touched on at all was the bio question.
yeah, that's I think where
Because
I was going to because
it's super hard when you're starting out. It's
the
so hard.
worst.
So I will tell you, I have a very clear and specific request for that. And that is tell me about your relationship to the book. Tell me about why you're interested, why you got interested in this. I don't need, 500 words about the process of researching it or writing it. But give me a couple sentences about where the material came from for you, what you found most compelling about that. I would rather have that than a list of publications any day.
And
Um,
tell me about the story that you are trying to tell here.
yes,
There's
that's good too.
I did a short challenge for writers a while back that was just it was just on our Discord, but it was tell me what's in your book without telling me anything about the plot or the characters.
Oh,
Right?
yeah, that's a
I
good one.
Yeah, I really liked that. That's what I want in the cover letter, right? That's what I want in the cover material. Is this yeah, yes, I understand that this is an urban fantasy book that has like Cthulhu living in a under the Exxon corporate office. Um, tell me that this is a coming of age story.
Yeah,
Um,
tell me about its heart.
yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And within that, I think one of the questions that was on your in your outline was comps. Do you need comps? I don't know. Comps are incredibly difficult. The role of comps in the publishing world is who comps are for in the publishing world is sales reps and
Mm-hmm.
book buyers at bookstores. That's what they want. So they want a list of things that are going to sell about the same amount to about the same audience. And that isn't what's another book about the novel I'm trying to finish is about a family that in a Midwestern, this sounds really compelling. A family working on a Midwestern farm in the late 1970s, right before all the farms went bust. And they don't need a 15-year-old book about farming. They need to know that what I'm really writing about is ecology. I'm really writing about how the food system and the way it was corporatized not only screwed over our food system, but is a huge part of the root of climate change. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they need to know it's a climate change book. They need to know it has Celtic fertility mythology in it. That like that's what a comp tells you is what's the spirit of the book, not what's it about. Because what's it about's in your description.
Yeah. Yeah. You're gonna write that summary. You're gonna, include your first 25 pages or whatever is asked for. You're gonna or 10,000 words or however much they want of it. You're gonna have it in manuscript format. You're gonna
You're gonna
prep
do
it,
all the
but
things that let the prose itself shine, that don't get in the way of the story, like we
yeah.
talked about earlier.
So all those attachments are you getting out of the way of the story, but this is where you get to show up for the story. This is where you're gonna talk about like, here's my bio. And sometimes it does matter, the list of publications.
Mhm.
Know your
I don't
audience.
think it's irrelevant, but if you don't have that, I would rather hear about your relationship with the work.
Right. Don't
Yeah.
kill yourself if you don't have a list of publications as long as your arm. And don't necessarily go out and solicit every vanity press you can find and every free online magazine you can find because you guys, we know about those. We're not just counting. We
Right,
know
right. It's not a checklist. It's not a checklist. It's a yeah, one quality pub is much more valuable than 15 crap ones.
right?
Yeah.
Right. So um and that's where we want to see your personality. That's where we want to know who you are. So that packet you're going to have, depending on the rules, is going to be a cover letter or a cover email
Mhm.
or both.
Mhm.
Um, if it doesn't ask for a cover email, do not waste your time writing a long email. Please just say attached find.
Mhm.
Please just say attached find.
Nobody's gonna
Um,
read it. If it wasn't requested, nobody's gonna read it.
Nobody's got time for that.
Nope.
Nobody's got time for that. Uh, thousand submissions, that's three a day, every day, all year long that you're not getting paid for. And I know magazines like Uncanny get 10,000
Yeah.
for a 2 month read period.
Right, and actually that brings up, and I don't know Uncanny super well, but if you are working within one of the genres that's called a genre, literary fiction is a genre too. Anybody who tells you otherwise is lying. But
This
if
is why
you're
we're
working
friends.
ridiculous people. But if you are working in a genre like romance or like fantasy or whatever, those are massive genres, and those publications are getting just an
Hammered.
inconceivable number of submissions on a regular basis. And so recognize that everything we've said about making sure you get out of the way of the work, may apply tenfold or 20-fold. And another thing that is unfortunately happening is that those seem to be the genres that are getting hit the hardest by shitty AI submissions. And so a
Yeah.
couple magazines have actually just closed submissions because they got so bombarded with stuff that was obviously written by ChatGPT that they couldn't do it anymore.
Right. So this is my speculation right now is that the less your cover letter looks like you use ChatGPT to help you draft it, the better chance you have of getting through. If
Mhm.
you write right now, what I am seeing from my friends in the industry is if you write a cover letter that looks like everybody else's cover letter, that looks like an internet form cover letter that doesn't have detailed information in the same voice as your story, um, I hope I'm not telling everyone how to get their AI story through, but sound like yourself, be yourself to the extent possible, because what we want right now is the confidence that we're not publishing AI.
Yeah. Yeah, and we could have whatever debate we want to have about that, but from an editor's perspective, even if you just boil that down purely to volume,
Yeah,
it's just it's unsustainable. So yeah, I mean, I actually I do think a lot of beginning writers will write without using AI, will write a letter that sounds super generic because they think they're being hyper professional. And yeah, it's okay to be yourself there. It's good to be yourself
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, don't necessarily pack it full of slang your editor doesn't understand, but do be yourself, or we're gonna yeet your cover letter.
Back in the day when I was at Puerto del Sol, the submissions were still paper. It was a long
Yeah.
time ago, right? And we had this because it was just super super writer centered, right? So we had this person who was like clearly young,
Hmm.
clearly very young, and he sent
Y'all,
us
we can tell when you're
we can
young.
we can we don't
We can
mind,
tell.
but we can
No, please send us stuff.
but
We love
but
you.
this kid put his cover letter on brown paper, like craft paper,
Yeah.
and wadded it up and put it in the envelope with his story. And it's like, so we get this fat envelope and we're like, what is this nonsense? And I opened it and it was handwritten.
Yeah.
It was intentional. It was like, hey, I'm gonna stand out and be special. And even said that, like,
Yeah.
I I bet you're not even gonna read this, but if you do, this was my attempt to stand out and be special and get your attention. And I did read it, and we did all personal responses at that magazine. And I
Wow.
did the person yeah, it was but we were young and energetic.
Yeah,
And
when I started it, yeah, right. We were doing all personal rejections. If we took something, it was sort of like uncommented, but if we rejected and we were running, you know, I don't 50 submissions a week, Um, and every single one of them got a personal rejection letter if they were rejected. It's a lot.
Yeah. It is a lot. It's a lot. And yeah, so but the thing is that what I said when I wrote this kid back was like, look, if you had put the energy, the creative energy from that letter into another revision, you'd be closer.
Yeah,
That's kind of my stance on that is that like, yeah, get yourself in there, but there's no need to prove anything or
yeah.
go overboard in that way.
If you find yourself writing the words, you're probably not going to read this,
Yeah.
I will stop there.
Tuck it in your back pocket
You
and
win.
write a professional letter.
You win. You're right. Congratulations.
Correctly assessed my intentions.
Yeah, because now I'm not. I'm not. I know.
Yeah.
I mean, I am, but I'm not. Not
Yeah.
really.
Not in the same way.
No, I've now judged you, and now
Yep.
I'm reading you as someone that I've judged, and you don't want me to do that. Like, I'm not trying to be a shitty person, but I am a person.
Exactly. Exactly. I'm not an idea. I'm not a machine.
You
I'm a
can't dare
human who
me to
has some
read your
responsibility.
story.
Right. Yeah, you can't trick me into it. Yeah.
Like, you're probably not going to read this. I don't know why I would have open submissions if I'm not reading them.
Right. What do you think we're doing here? But I do think that there's a spirit of thinking that they're just in it to say no, and I have never met an editor who wasn't in it to say yes.
Right? We all
Every
just,
editor I've ever talked to or worked with lives for the yes.
yeah,
Like the whole thing we want is to say yes.
yeah,
I
yeah.
wanted to say that like my thunderous herd of children has just arrived in the garage and
We are down to the end of our time anyway, and I think
could
that's
come
a
through any
brilliant line to end on is that we do
right.
want to say there's nothing we want more than to accept your story. Please make it as easy for us as possible. Read the guidelines, have as much
Yes, with
personality as you
respect.
can within those guidelines. Treat us like we're also people.
Mhm.
Respect the process.
And it
We're
helps to remember that we're also writers. We're doing this too. I think that you kind of started with that spirit, and I think that
Yeah,
it is a helpful place to end to remember like we genuinely are all in this together.
we know exactly how it feels to get one of the rejections we're sending. We know exactly how bad it feels.
Mhm.
Even our form rejection letters are written with that in mind. We can't make it hurt any less than we already have made it. Like,
Nope.
we can't, we have done everything possible to minimize the hurt that you're feeling right now. And we're sorry. We
We
really
are.
are.
We are
Because
because we wanted to say yes when we
we
opened
wanted
that
to say
file.
yes.
We wanted to say yes.
Yeah. Yeah. All
Yep.
right, Victoria, thank you so much, everybody. We will see you in July. Where I'm sure we're talking about something, but it's so early in the month that I haven't written the post yet. I think we're still on traditional publishing for July. So again, thank you, and really appreciated having you on this month. And go
Thank
tend to your
you.
herd.
Great, great. Yeah, no, they're not here yet. They're on their way.
All right, I am gonna hit the stop button before they can get in.
All right, great to talk to you. Thank you so
Good to talk
much.
to you. Thank you.